Hi, and welcome. My name is Arthur Zaczkiewicz, and welcome to Corner of Fifth Street Talk. This is where we share insights about the fashion apparel, retail, and beauty markets, along with the trends and technologies that is shaping business today. My guest today is Bruce Findlay, who's the managing director of retail at Landsec, all the way from the other side of the pond. Welcome.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
I guess first maybe tell us about Landsec and what you guys do there.
Sure. I think the closest parallel to Landsec in the US context would be the Simon Property Group.
Yep.
So Landsecurity's core business is actually London office space where they're dominant, but I run the regional retail side, which incorporates large shopping centers, our largest being 1.8 million square feet in Bluewater, and we're in a range of geographies in the UK, from Scotland and Glasgow over to Cardiff in Wales to famous cities like Liverpool and Oxford, as well as we have a few outlets. Our biggest outlet is down in Gunworth Quays in Portsmouth, has a range of brands that you would expect, like Tommy and Calvin and Ralph Lauren. So it's core business, and we are part of establishing the FTSE stock exchange. So it's a very old traditional property company, but I've been brought in to bring it, what they said, from poacher to gamekeeper, because my career has been with brands like Tommy and Calvin, or in the British context, Marks and Spencer's.
How did you get it? How did you fall into retail? Was it a chosen path or?
Not many people I've met over the decades I've worked in retail, going back to my first jobs in the late 80s when I was a teenager, intend to go into retail. It's often a part-time work when you're a student or beginning your career. So many young people get their first work experience in things like retail and, of course, hospitality. So it was an accidental love affair that began when I was young, just selling. That's led to a career that's had me living first in London, all the way to moving to Amsterdam, living in Hong Kong, to more recently Italy. So it's been a great life and a love affair with consumers and brands ultimately at the heart of it.
What were some of the brands and retailers that you worked for?
Yeah, so I actually, my first really formal training was at a time when Gap was growing in the UK. I was in my sort of mid-late 20s looking to professionalize my store management skills and they had some great training programs. And it was a dynamic, fast-paced business. And so that start really was where I started to see the connection of merchandising and the importance roles of the merchants, the buyers, the planners, and all that stuff that was, if I was the front of house, leading retail teams on the shop floor and dealing with customers, and all the fun that comes with that, it was really the exposure to the things outside of the shop floor that started really perking up my interest in seeing a long-standing career.
Well, like you said, outside the shop floor, like where?
Yeah, so eventually, I did my first sort of decade, like Gladwell talks about this sort of the 20,000 hour work thing. And I realized I'd been on that shop floor for about 20,000 hours and gained all the expertise I could. That transition to head office, I was given a chance to join. I was working actually at Levi's and Dockers, and they asked me to come work in Europe, based in Amsterdam, in the merchandise department. So I started as a junior planner, allocating women's bottoms to stores around Europe, in Spain, and learning differences in the markets in Europe, the certain colorways that work better in the south of Europe compared to the north, or if they wanted more slim fits in Scandinavia than they wanted at that time in other markets where they were going a bit looser fits. And so for me, it was starting to see more and more about the science behind retail.
Yeah.
Everything from the shop construction and the science of fit out and at that time, new VM tools were being launched to help digitally communicate where to put products. It was really an interesting, that era from the 90s to 2000 where I believe retail became much more scientific thanks to technology, of course, right? And allocation systems. I was part of some of the first RFID chip testing when I was with a magic wand for replenishment. So it was an amazing time to really see, and of course the birth of e-commerce. I was there for that, as companies like Tommy Hilfiger launched their first websites.
What were some of the lessons learned in those early years?
Well, sitting here today, having gone through the birth of e-commerce to the rise of omni-channel thinking a decade ago, to where we are now in this, in an era where people are selling via TikTok and social media, and this, what they refer to as a unified commerce.
Unified commerce, yeah.
Coming to a property side like I am today, the first things I had to tell my board members 5 years ago is there was not a war to be waged between online and offline. which was they were looking at an existential threat of coming out of the pandemic and the threat that because e-commerce here had reached 30% penetration versus a norm before that had been around 20 and 15. And during lockdown, of course, it was well over 50% because you couldn't literally go in stores. That getting people to see that wasn't a threat and instead was a way that retailers and great brands could connect to the market, not just wholesale and retail channels, as might have been traditionally the case. So it's just really understanding that our guests visiting our shopping centers, that they are looking online before they come to make physical purchases. They're dropping off packages that they've received at home or in their office to click and collect and return. All these services that they've worked on that we want to help facilitate, because I know my guests on any given moment have different experience expectations and their guest journeys will be different, possibly even during the day. From I'm in a hurry to grab my click and collect to I've got all evening to wine and dine, watch a movie and pick up something from the Apple store. All those, and it's happening everywhere all the time, every day.
So how did you end up in the real estate side? What was that transition like?
I had, real estate and property was always a key component, location. That phrase has always rung true when I was, whether it was at Gap, Levi's, or Tommy Hilfiger. And funnily enough, it was actually the founder of Landsec who coined that phrase, Mr. Samuel, about 80 years ago, really coined the phrase location. So that rings true for both a retailer and a property. But really, truthfully, it was that the CEO had come in and was looking to shake things up. He wanted some different thinking and a real customer-centric approach. And of course, he meant Inditex, Zara, Jeanette, Sephora, those are our customers. And I was like, kind of understanding and agreeing, but my point to him was, really, our customer is the end user. That footfall that the retailers and hospitality businesses are coming for is our currency. And even more than that, I've said eyeballs actually today are as important as footfall, because we're also looking at not just rental income, but commercial income from media, commercialization activities, and nothing new under the sun. These are the same things I saw as a young man shopping in the Cherry Hill Mall in New Jersey, right? It's just today it's a little slicker, the advertising changeovers.
I mean, here in the U.S., I grew up on Long Island, and I remember there was the Smith Haven Mall, like one of the first on Long Island back in the 60s, and it was an adventure to go. We went there because of the anchor stores that were there, and then we would stroll around. I think the experience has changed. Like, how has shopping evolved, the actual shopping experience evolved?
Well, and that's a really key phrase, experience, right? So in my earlier career, kind of shopper experience, in-store shopping experience started becoming more and more important to brands. And that look and feel of a store, of course, the service at the heart of it, right? Like, Sephora famously, that's, their big proposition difference, that, great service and product knowledge. But that sort of experience now has expanded, and being in my new seat where I have a wider remit than just working for any one brand, that in-between experience, we call it experience-led places. That's fundamental in this experience economy time, and we're seeing it impacting younger generations as well as the mature generations. They're looking to have the social aspects, right? Our places are about meeting, and at the heart of it, social time, right? And that's what's really been the secret sauce to our success. Of course, a great curated brand lineup with all the right things. But then through that, facilitating from arrival in your car or by bus, however you got there, all that seamless experience till you leave and hopefully tell friends what a great time you had. In between, hopefully finding the brands you loved and look for, because that's the single biggest guest experience winner, right? That they had the shops you wanted to, but how do you surprise and delight people? Given those Instagram moments, things to remember, that's where we really win in the long run.
That's Nordstrom does a really good job of that. They've set up like little social vignettes, for people to share on social.
Yeah, and department stores have been really forced to raise that bar, I think.
Right, and it's important for like my daughter. I think our kids are probably the Gen Z, sorry, and their shopping experience is completely different. They go to the mall with their cameras, with their phones, and they're shopping in store, online, taking selfies, trying things on. It's a completely different.
Yeah.
It's a non-linear, right? It's a non-linear experience for them.
my wife's sitting while we're watching TV. She's there scrolling. I'm thinking, who's she chatting with or what's going on? At least she's not going left or right. She's going up and down. So I think she's not on a dating app. But it's her way to relax is looking at products online. Now, she will then probably seek them out, sometimes ordering home, but very often wanting to see them in person and go out with a friend, grab a cup of tea as well on that journey, right? And spend that social time. But it's really interesting to see that young people, especially, out in force, right? And when I arrived in my company, the traditional view of on-site staff and security was kind of that teenagers are a bit of a problem to kind of be shooed along, like if they're hanging out. And I surprised everybody because I started inserting more and more seating. I said, no, stop chasing these kids off. Let them sit down. Let them hang out. We want them hanging out in dwell time, as long as they're not getting up to any antisocial behavior.
Right.
And that's the same for older people too. That seating is often young and old people all sitting together in the communities that we serve, just relaxing and watching the world go by. What's better than people watching, right, as an experience? And of course, that's what I've always loved about New York, but in our malls, you get to see every kind of person, and kids love that. They want to see what the others are wearing, just like, dare I say, us old Gen Xers did. What's the latest looks, right? And one thing is having it pushed on your socials, which all these kids know, the algorithm's doing it. Another thing is seeing what actually people are out there wearing, right?
That's something my daughter and I do. We will sit at the mall and we'll guess people's occupations, people watching it. But the store experience, and I mean, let's zoom in a little bit on pre-COVID versus today in this post-pandemic period. Yeah. I know it was like 5 or 6 years ago. What's changed? What's the biggest changes that you've seen?
I think I remember the first time I went to a restaurant with other people again, and that sound of just the din of others chatting, and how great that felt again, right? So we saw the initial, what they called here in the UK, revenge shopping. There was pent up savings, right? People were even coming out initially with masks still on as restrictions were easing. So we saw that as the signs that physical wasn't dead, right? That there was still this need, there was still a place in the world for this. While, yeah, some people still going to want a Deliveroo and convenience of that, right? No problem. But for me, it just heightened the social aspects that maybe people had taken a bit for granted. And in a world where, my son had already had his first Oculus, everyone was probably a bit anxious of where is this pointing to the toxicity in social media that was more and more getting reported and as abuse forum. So, it's like a perfect storm of factors that led people back to these more, dare I say, traditional routes. Now, of course, here in the UK, a covered mall might be more welcome than in Arizona and some other places with better weather. So we have a bit of that built in. It's different when you're in LA, in the Westfield Century City, which I love the Century City Mall in Westfield as an example of great, mall, how to run a great mall. So, but it's this community spirit, I think, is the first thing that I was really seeing to tap back into. The sense of community that was getting fractious and is still today in a world where, just in the Super Bowl last night, the halftime show was all about unity, right? And so we see a part to play in our communities that the pandemic just helped reignite. And our internet penetration is really stable in the UK, as I think it is in the States. You guys, I think, are around 15%, whereas we're a bit higher at about 20. It's stable. It's stable now a few years.
Right. But what about I guess I call it the convergence of let's say content and shopping. Like we talked about on our pre-call about Netflix. What's driving that? What's behind that and how consumers responding?
Yeah, and seeing an example like Netflix House, where you can both eat, play Squid Games, mini golf, go to the merch store, or just areas where you're just immersing in the different TV show brands that you love with other fans. And this whole fandom thing is huge. That's like a concept like Cosm in LA that's slowly rolling out across the US, the more scalable versions of the sphere. It all speaks to, yes, shared experience and shared reality, not through a lens, but also, it's this element of fandom. So those have always been there, right? Like the success of the Marvel. So whether it's cinema, which has ultimately had a bit of a rebound the last couple of years, post the Barbieheimer effect that we all had a couple of summers ago. But these all speak in that same language of mixed experiences, that you can, just still do traditional things. But the newer things, we opened a concept first it was about a year after we had the problem of empty department store space.
Right.
Debenhams, which is a bit like a Macy's of the UK, had gone under with about 70 locations. And so people were left with anywhere from 120 to 1,000 square foot of vacant space over 2 or 3 floors. And filling that with any single retailer is virtually impossible, right? Even a Uniqlo doesn't want that much space. So we had to come up with creative solutions. And the first one we had was with an operator called Gravity. I was standing on site with the beauty hall sign still hanging from the roof, and the guy's describing a Tokyo themed electronic go-kart racing track. And I'm trying to picture this with bends and ups and downs through what was an old beauty hall leading into some women's apparel on a ground floor. You got to the second floor, there were some more traditional arcade games. By the third floor, you had augmented reality bowling lanes, darts, and it was like a little department store of experiences, including F&B and physical games linked with technology, as well as they had those crazy booths where you wear little dee boppers and you can play Pac-Man with your whole head, right? To the gaming room that my teenage son and his friends loved because they had all the racing car chips and you could just play all the games and game with your mates. We started finding other solutions like that incorporated different experiences that traditionally malls avoided because they didn't necessarily pay great rent per square foot. And my argument was, if we get people to come, the halo effect will take care of itself. So these sort of more dynamic concepts beyond just a very transactional space get more and more interested in retailers like mine who want to draw a variety of footfall and reasons to stay, let alone come again.
So that's a good point about department stores, that they're kind of facing some challenges. I think about here around New York City, I struggle to go into a department store because if I have a favorite brand, I want to experience that brand in a larger way with more choices. And it's hard for a department store to do because
and the service that you might expect with that, right? That the person working at the department store might not even really be an expert on that brand. They might just be...
So is that what it fall on in the department store? Like, is there future based on what you were just saying about,
I think more and more they're having to find those. First, it was eateries or like cafe type things. In my hometown in Newcastle, they had to introduce a champagne bar in one of their different tricks to try. That was a more premium end pitch. So we're seeing here in the UK, one of the larger ones, they're starting to sublet space to other uses, right? Like, so John Lewis's, which is a fairly traditional department store of, home, beauty, tech, and apparel. They started introducing, first it was some food concepts, then they've dropped in a big shop and shop that was a company called Decathlon. It's a European company. They do a lot of technical sporting equipment. So they're trying to add categories, they're trying to add experiential items, upgrade their beauty halls to the latest concepts, right, with all the new tricks and toys available. And this is the challenge, how to stay relevant when some of these monobrand specialists are doing such amazing work with their brands, right? So, if you love Nike, what's the best Nike experience? It's probably Nike Town, and really immerse in that brand versus, a Foot Locker exposure to a limited range of colorways.
Right.
Multi-brand environments have different challenges to mono, but they can still have a place when they get their curated offer right. And this all comes back to, Arthur, knowing your guests, right? But as a brand, you need to know who your target is. And as a landlord like myself, I'm literally, I'd reestablished the communication direct from consumer feedback loop. My company had cut that cost out to save some money. And I was like, so you don't actually hear from your shoppers anymore. And they said, well, they had some mystery shopping. I said, really? That's it? Like, 1,000 samples? So I can get 1 million shoppers to tell us what they think tomorrow if you give me the chance. And that's what we've now signed up. We signed up within 2 years, 1 million. And you have to imagine in the UK, there's only about 65 million humans in the United Kingdom. So we want to get to about 3 million in our database. Our catchments serve something like about a third of the UK adult population. So to me, if I can get to that 3 or 4 million, I can really add value to brand partners. So if you come with your restaurant concept, I can immediately communicate to the food lovers in the area.
That's a great point. There's so much data out there, but are brands using it the right way, do you think, or no?
Often they're all drinking from the same chalice. The challenge a lot of smaller mid-cap companies would have is there's a company here in the UK called CACI. They're compiling banking data and other like phone pinging data. So they give you a great suite of information about an area that you might be considering for your brand, down to a specific street or location, and about the demographics and everything. So everyone's drinking that Kool-Aid. The best brands own those relationships already. You know, the largest database in the UK, I believe, of adults is Apple's, as so many people are connected.
Everywhere.
Things like Boots, which I think was bought by Walgreens recently.
Yep.
Boots is a big, started as originally a chemist and is much more than a chemist. They have like over 20 million on their database. A Marks and Spencer's, the big British home, they have like, you know, clothing, but their food business has been huge the last few years, growing. They've got, you know, 15 to 20 million on their database. That's how you win, right? Owning that CRM data, first party data that allows you to speak to people and not buying secondhand information. That's what the real winners, because our market today is defined by winners and losers and always has been. There's always been brands fading out, sometimes coming back before, you know, there's that life cycle that goes on. It's always been the way as trends move and change and people either adapt or don't.
The MasterCard has a similar technology. I think it's called Spending Pulse. And they invited me to look at it. And, you know, I live up in the Hudson Valley in upstate New York. And I said, and they could, I call it, it's like a commerce heat map. And you can see where people are spending and how much. So I asked them, I said, can you dig a little bit? So I asked them to show me, you know, incomes of, you know, over $200,000 a year, you know, living in the New York City area, and where they go up in the Hudson Valley, you can see they, you know, they go up the thruway, they stop and get gas at exit 19, and they go on to see the Phoenicia Diner. Yeah, and it's, you know, there's a concentration.
You can literally start getting that journey mapped.
Right. So that's to go to your first point. It's about location, right? I mean, the technology is out there, and that helps inform where you need to be. But that said,
yeah, we looked at every kind of solution from sensors and things. At the end, this geo-positioning stuff, it's anonymized because I don't actually mind if it's Arthur or Bruce. I want to understand this person came from 50 miles away to see that Sephora store opening, or they came 10 miles every day to go to the supermarket. Because, you know, supermarkets are great footfall drivers. They might not be the best for your income or prestige, but they drive repeat visits. And understanding those dynamics, Arthur, is key to anyone's business almost.
So let's talk about your curation. Curation is in a sense of a brand. How do you, there's a real art, and there's probably science behind that too. Like, how do you work with brand partners to make sure that the adjacencies are right and people are going head to head?
Adjacency is often the first and foremost. So even when I was in a global retail position, sitting in a, you know, ivory tower in the middle, you know, remotely, and I'm having a look at malls in China I've never been to. The first thing me and the CEO are looking at is, okay, they've picked this mall in some Guangzhou or somewhere, and there's 7 malls to look at. The first thing is, who are the adjacencies on that floor? Who's present in that mall? Because it's already giving you a sense of comfort, right? Of they're my competitive set or they're my peers. That's how I benchmark myself. So that's a head start, right? But beyond that, there's still so many other factors you need to make, because if others haven't done their homework, you just might be repeating their mistake, right? So adjacency is not enough. But ultimately, the brands, what we've seen here, there was a big trend also coming out of the pandemic. There was a few major trends, but one of them, they call it here, the flight to prime, right? And then there was fewer, bigger, better. So take a brand, you know, Inditex, the Zara parent company. So we worked a lot, we had quite a few Zara sites that I inherited when I came in. And what they've been doing is, first of all, the flight to prime made them say, okay, in a place like London, we've got 8 stores. They did their own homework. They said we could actually probably do 90% of these sales with 6. So they closed 2, relocated 1, and they grew their business. Even by closing 2 stores, they were able to grow. They started applying that kind of template as they went around the country. They closed standalone furniture stores that were Zara.
Right.
They closed then the apparel store, and they upsized, which is the fewer, bigger, better, to my mall, which was the prime mall in that city. So they had 2 sites outside of our perimeter of my mall. They closed those and negotiated to go into, actually, funnily enough, it was a company called Topshop. So indeed, they took over this prime location within my prime location. So they took the best site the Topshop had, brought their 2 other store concepts together, and bang, grew their business 30%. So they didn't just recover the lost sales of 2 stores, they actually improved the performance by combining it, and operationally they're more profitable because they don't need 2 store managers. So fewer, bigger, better, and the flight to prime has really fueled, and that's all coming from their data. They can see the footfall and the eyeballs that my place gets. They can see the spending power of my center. That's the key decision factor. And then they have to have confidence in their ability to convert that passing traffic into entering the store and then transacting, whether that's 10% conversion, 20, depending on your price positioning, right? You can have higher or low.
So when I think back, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, about the traditional retail real estate executive, he wears or she wears a wrinkled suit, has a bunch of stacks of papers, and they call their, they call them tenants, the people who, are
Worse, here they call them occupiers. I said occupiers. The only occupiers I remember were Nazis. We don't call these guys occupiers.
So today, and you said it 3 or 4 times, they're brand partners, right? It's a completely different mindset. That the industry's tapping people like you with retail brand experience. It's a completely different culture, right? Is that, and it's paying off, right?
Yeah, and it was very conscious, like to change the language internally first. Changing some of that language got people to start to slowly change their mindsets. Because when I got here, the idea was when you were doing a deal, right, for a leasing with probably an agent involved, and the other side has their tenant rep or agent involved. It's like one party's trying to like get one over on the other.
Right.
And that's also what led to a lot of the problems in the property cycles that we were in. We really wanted to have not just sustainable rent, but we want them to have a sustainable business, right? So if they're not performing, it's not benefiting me, because ultimately, Arthur, if my shoppers aren't buying from that place, even if I personally like the brand, I don't want it anymore because they're turned off by it. And I only want, a bit like Bezos, I took Bezos's principle. I said, I only want to stock stuff people want. It sounds really easy, like when you say it like that, duh, but it's hard to do. So, only have things that people want. It's that simple, and they'll vote with their feet and their wallets every day.
You said it before, the word halo, and there's also a halo effect when it comes to a physical store and online shopping, right? How does that all converge in the future of retail?
It's amazing the stats now around that area, Arthur. The amount of reliance that it used to be that physical presence was seen to help the web, like that people will recognize your brand, maybe go look online at your brand because they see you physically, that you're like real. Today, I think it's almost flipped, that they know there's stats out there for some brands that like 80% of their traffic to the physical stores because they were recognized online. And this again goes back to this irrelevance of one. It's not one versus another. It's just what moment is that person in? And the two are symbiotically fueling each. When that brand gets it right, whether you're Gucci or Zara or even Primark in the UK, which is a real, it might not be familiar to everybody in the States, but more like an Old Navy type price positioning. They didn't have any website at all until like the last couple of years. Where even they had to go, hang on, we've got to get into this. It's not going to kill my stores to have this connection to where probably young people are.
Yep. And
a lot of less young men and women too.
So the shopping journey is no longer linear, right? You can start anywhere.
Wavy, curvy.
I read somewhere that I think like 40% of online shoppers who shop after 6 p.m. shop in bed, and they're usually tipsy, a little bit, had too much to drink. Yeah. So it could start.
I always have to watch out for that one. Impulse purchasing is made almost too easy with this medium because it's just a couple of, it's not hard. It's always a little different when you're physically moving to something. You have to go out of your way to get somewhere. It's quite purposeful. And we have that in our shopping centers because people often ask me, what's better, having a place like in a city center or out of town? It's different things. Footfall to out of town is usually vastly lower than in town, but conversion rates tend to be higher out of towns. some of the biggest spending environments, like our Blue Water shopping center, if someone went online and looked at it, it's in a quarry, an old abandoned quarry in Kent, in kind of the middle of nowhere. So you can't accidentally get there. And it looks like a spaceship landed in like this like sunken quarry it was old limestone sides. Versus in a place like Cardiff, where we have a thing called St. David's, it's 2 minutes from the station. It is literally the heart of the city centre. And every day, thousands of people walk through it with no actual intent to buy. It's just they're avoiding the rain as they walk about half a mile through their city centre and come out of a different entrance somewhere else. But along that journey, they are seeing things.
Right.
They're seeing my advertising screens that the guys have paid revenue to be on. They're seeing those window displays. And maybe next thing you know, they're grabbing a pretzel. Or,
Yeah, Neiman Marcus, when they first came onto the scene way back when, their sales team, I don't know if you noticed, but their sales team, associates would have index cards of their top customers, and they would jot down things like the sizes that they wore, the birthdays, any information, and then they would use them when the customer came in. It would help for a prompt, and it would create that moment to say, this is a personalized experience. And they were really the first to create this, clienteling, this idea of clientele.
Yes.
And then that evolved, and then they have brands like Ralph Lauren and LVMH, doing it with their brand stores. Now it's entering a new phase where it's like a high level of personalization. Is that?
But now democratized, right, to a more accessible price points.
Right. So it doesn't have to be just the luxury consumer.
Right. No, but often things start like that, like many trends, start at the highest sort of luxury end and start to become more social norms. I certainly, when I was at my last store manager's job at Dockers, this was like late 90s, internet was super slow back then. Really only good for transmitting stock data or something when you didn't need it. Didn't need an answer. It was an overnight, connection, dialing up. But back then I had a black book where I was bonused on conversion rates in my store as well as volume. So for me, the best sales I could have didn't involve someone entering the store. Mm-hmm. So if I had 10 people enter and I sold one thing, that was my 10% conversion rate. And I had a bonus target to beat 10, but still deliver 30,000 a week or whatever the sales target was. And my favorite customers were ones I could just go in my book, call up a guy like me who was 6'5" and could only wear 36 leg length. And I go, I've got that chino you like in blue, black, and gray. And the guy would be like, I'll take all three. And I would do the credit card sale I got a transaction, I got sales, and I didn't have someone enter. I was on a head start. Now today, that's a totally different game, right? When we were expanding stores with Zara, they were building click and collect sections where they would actually have a dedicated area so that they didn't screw up the shopping experience of you and I who were just buying something physically in a queue, like lining up at the cash desk. Because people were complaining that the person was taking too long returning something or collecting something and the staff disappeared. So all that facilitation that's there to help, from the old days of making a phone call to someone to how automated all that is. It's remarkable, the work of the supply chains, the logistics, right? Everything that's coming together down to mobile tech. And when brands get it right, it's amazing, seamless experience. One small mistake, and this has always been the hardest thing in the world of retail, is getting someone to come back who's had a negative experience. And when I've asked people in interviews, they'll say, I used to ask them to tell me about their shopping experiences, because you can really understand when you want to hire somebody what kind of person they are by hearing them talk about positive experiences and negative. When I asked them, can you tell me a negative experience? They could rattle off 2 or 3. They looked at me like I was a thief. They didn't offer me something else that could be interesting. When I tried to get positive experiences out of people, they would really struggle to remember. And then the key question, I'd go, did you tell anyone about the negative one? Oh yeah, I told my cousin, my aunt, my doctor. Tell anyone about the good experience? No, this was the first time I thought about it. And that, unfortunately, is a human situation. That's reality, that we probably don't talk enough about all those good experiences. But we know them intuitively, right? We have attached those memories to those brands we love. And if they get their product and service right, and they're in the right location, they've got a great chance to succeed.
That's a great bit of advice and experiences. This is a great experience, Bruce. I'm glad you took time to join us today. And Oh, we'll have to have you come back. This is really good and informative. So
Yeah,
thank
no,
you.
it's exciting times out there as this market keeps evolving, and it's hard to keep up with, but that's the challenge for all of us, right?
All right. See you next time. And
Thank you
thanks for tuning in. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, and say goodbye. Cheers for now.
Cheers.